spent 3 years quietly saving $224,000 to renovate my grandmother's lakeside property in Prince Edward Island, and when I finally drove up that gravel lane with her sitting in the passenger seat, not knowing where we were going, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, like I was finally doing something that mattered. Then my phone rang. It was my uncle's number. I let it go to voicemail. He left one. I played it in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons outside Charlottetown while my grandmother was inside using the washroom. His voice was careful in the way it gets when he's already decided something and is just informing you after the fact. "Just so you know," he said, "Brenda and I have been talking to someone about the cottage. Nothing final. Just exploring." That was it. 14 seconds. My name is Laurel. I'm 32 years old and I work as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in Halifax. My job is to find the thing people buried under the thing they told you about. I have spent the better part of a decade reading financial disclosures and estate documents the way other people read menus. Not for what they say, but for what they're choosing not to list. I did not come to this work by coincidence. My grandmother raised me from the time I was 11 after my mother moved west and my father followed 6 months later without telling me he was going. She never made a production of it. She simply added a second toothbrush to the bathroom and enrolled me in school and made sure I had a winter coat that actually fit. That was who she was. So when I was in a position to give something back, I did it the same way she had, quietly, without announcing it. The cottage had been in her family for close to 50 years. Her late husband built the original structure himself over 2 summers in the late 70s. By the time I took on the project, the electrical was a genuine hazard, the insulation was decades past its useful life, and the porch she had eaten breakfast on every summer morning for as long as I could remember, had boards so soft in places you had to know where to step. She had been managing it the way she managed everything she didn't want to burden anyone with, which is to say silently and with total competence, until the point where competence alone could no longer hold it together. I hired a contractor I had worked with on 2 previous client files, a man named Stefan who ran a small operation out of Summerside and who I trusted completely because I had watched how he handled complications. I did not tell my grandmother. I did not tell my uncle or his wife. I pulled the permits under a numbered company I had set up for the purpose, arranged financing through my personal line of credit in a TFSA I had been building for 8 years, and managed every phase of the work myself on evenings and weekends over 14 months. Widened doorways throughout. A walk-in shower with a fold-down teak bench and grab bars finished in matte black so they looked like a design choice rather than a medical fixture. A kitchen island dropped 4 inches from standard height because my grandmother is 5'2" and has been reaching up to her own counters her entire adult life. A covered ramp alongside the front steps. Gentle grade, non-slip surface that I had Stefan build to look like it had always been part of the original architecture. New electrical, new insulation, new roof, new porch boards, and a small sleeping loft added above the sitting room for when she wanted guests to stay without giving up her own bedroom. Total cost when it was finished was $224,000. I had transferred the title into a family trust 6 months earlier, naming my grandmother as sole lifetime beneficiary with the successor interest to her direct descendants. I was the trustee. The document was registered with the province of Prince Edward Island and filed with a notary in Charlottetown. I had a copy in a binder in the back seat of my car. The day I drove her out there, I told her we were going to have lunch somewhere along the water. She wore the cardigan she always wears when she doesn't know what to dress for. When she recognized the lane, she went very still. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That can't be right," and I said it is, and she pressed her hand flat against the window like she was trying to confirm it was solid. She walked through every room twice. She stood in the kitchen and ran her hands along the new countertop at the lower section and didn't say anything for long enough that I had to look away. She sat in one of the chairs on the rebuilt porch and looked out at the water for almost 20 minutes while I made tea and sighed. When I brought it out, she said, "I thought I was going to have to let this go." I told her that wasn't going to happen. I told her her name was in the trust and that nobody could sell it or change how it was used without her agreement and mine both. She nodded slowly like she was cataloging it. Your grandfather would have liked those grab bars, she finally said, and I knew that was the closest she was going to get to telling me what it meant to her. We stayed the first weekend eating off the old enamel plates she'd had since before I was born, and I helped her figure out the new oven controls. And on Sunday morning, I sat on the porch with my coffee and watched the light come across the strait and felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for a long time. I should have anticipated what came next. I know that. My grandmother cannot hold good news inside herself. It comes out of her the way heat comes out of a warm room when you open the door. She mentioned the cottage to my uncle during a Sunday call 3 weeks later. Not everything, just that it had been fixed up nicely. That I had arranged it. He called me the following Tuesday. His tone was warm in the practiced way it gets when he wants something. Your grandmother tells me you've done something incredible out at the cottage, he said. Brenda and I were thinking we'd love to come see it. Just to show some support. I told him that was fine. I had a deposition in Moncton that weekend and couldn't be there myself, but I said my grandmother would probably enjoy the company. That was the mistake. Not a legal one. A human one. My grandmother called me on the Sunday evening of that visit. Her voice had that particular quality, like she was holding two things in her hands at the same time and trying not to drop either of them. Your uncle brought someone with him, she said. A man from a property management company. He had a folder. I asked her what was in the folder. She said she wasn't entirely sure. She said the man had talked for a long time about rental income and peak season rates and something about a management fee structure. She said my uncle had seemed to know him well. She said they had walked the whole property inside and out and that the man had taken photographs. She said she had told them she didn't think it was her decision to make. She said my uncle had told her not to worry about it, that he would handle it. I was in my car 18 minutes later. I want to be precise about what I saw when I pulled up. My uncle's truck was parked sideways across the upper part of the lane in a way that suggested familiarity rather than consideration. Through the kitchen window, I could see my uncle's wife sitting at the table with a mug of tea like she lived there. My uncle was on the porch with the property manager. I could see the man's company vest, green with a white logo, and they were both looking out at the water in the considering way people look at something they are calculating. My grandmother was in the sitting room. She was standing rather than sitting, which told me everything. She stands when she's waiting for something difficult to resolve itself. My uncle came in from the porch when he heard my car. He was already explaining before I'd set down my bag. We were just exploring some options, he said. This property is sitting empty 8 months of the year. Short-term rentals on the island can bring in serious money, 40,000-50,000 in a good summer. Your grandmother could use the income. He said this last part with real warmth, like it was the through line of the whole thing, like the income was the point. The property manager came in behind him and set a printed sheet on the kitchen table. Projected seasonal revenue. Occupancy estimates, a fee schedule for the management company, a draft listing description that referred to the property as a charming heritage waterfront cottage, fully renovated, sleeps 6. I looked at the listing description. I looked at my grandmother. She had both hands around her mug. I said, this property is held in trust. Short-term rental isn't a permitted use under the trust instrument. My uncle said he was sure we could figure something out. He said trust documents weren't always as fixed as they seemed. He said he knew a lawyer in Summerside. I went to my car and got the binder. I want to explain something about the way I document things. It is not a strategy exactly. It is more like a professional reflex, the same one that makes me print confirmation emails and keep physical copies of signed agreements and photograph documents before I hand them over. I had brought the full file because I bring the full file everywhere that matters. I had not anticipated needing it that weekend, but I had brought it. I set the first document on the kitchen table, the trust instrument registered with the province of Prince Edward Island with my grandmother named as sole lifetime beneficiary. I read the relevant clause aloud. The property was designated for the personal residential use of the beneficiary only. No subletting. No commercial rental of any kind. No short-term listing on any platform. Any proposed change to the permitted use required written agreement from both the beneficiary and the trustee. I was the trustee. My uncle said trust documents could be amended. I set the second document on the table, a written opinion from the notary who had registered the instrument, confirming that the trust was validly constituted under PEI legislation and that the permitted use clause was binding on all parties, including family members acting in an advisory capacity to the beneficiary. My uncle's wife said we were being very rigid about something that was meant to help my grandmother. I set the third document on the table, a screenshot of the draft listing that the property manager's company had already uploaded to a short-term rental platform. The listing was live. It included photographs taken from inside the cottage, the sitting room, the renovated kitchen, the porch, and it gave the address. The account was registered to my uncle's email. I had flagged it to the platform's trust and safety team 2 hours earlier, citing misrepresentation of ownership and unauthorized listing of a property held in trust. The property manager picked up the sheet and looked at it. Then he set it down and did not pick it up again. I set the fourth document on the table. The PEI Tourism Act provisions governing short-term accommodation rentals. A tourism operator license was required. A municipal permit was required. A fire inspection and safety compliance certificate were required. None of these had been applied for. None had been issued. The fine for operating a short-term rental without proper licensing began at $5,000 per occurrence. My uncle said he hadn't realized it was that involved. I said, I know. Then I set the fifth document on the table. It was a letter drafted by my firm's senior partner and signed in his capacity as legal counsel, addressed jointly to my uncle and to the property management company. It formally notified them that the property was protected under an irrevocable trust instrument, that the listing constituted unauthorized commercial exploitation of a trust asset, that any further attempt to list, photograph, market, or enter the property for commercial purposes without the written consent of the trustee would be treated as a breach of fiduciary duty and addressed accordingly through provincial courts, that all further communication regarding the property was to be directed to my firm's office. The property manager left first. He shook no one's hand. He took his folder with him. My uncle's wife went to the bathroom and stayed there for a while. My uncle stood at the kitchen window with his back to the room. He said, "This is family, Laurel." I said, "I know. That's why I drove 3 hours on a Sunday." He said I was making something out of nothing. I said the listing was live 4 days after they visited, and I had screenshots with timestamps. He said that wasn't how it was supposed to go. I said I didn't know what that meant, and I wasn't sure it mattered. I told them they were welcome to visit when they'd been invited by my grandmother. I told them I would see them out. What followed was loud enough that my grandmother went and sat on the porch. My uncle made 2 phone calls from the driveway. His wife said something to me in the doorway that I won't repeat here. Eventually, both vehicles left and the lane was quiet again. My grandmother made tea. She does this when something has happened that she wants to metabolize before she speaks about it. We sat at the kitchen table while the light moved across the water. She said, "He came last summer too, you know. He asked about the septic system. He asked about the well." She paused. I thought he was just interested in the property. She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I should have told you. I told her she hadn't done anything wrong." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't think I've ever said no to your uncle about anything." She wasn't saying it like a complaint. She was saying it like she'd just noticed something about herself that she hadn't noticed before. It never felt like I was allowed to. I told her that was the thing about a trust. It meant she didn't have to be the one to say no. The document said it for her. That was the whole point. She nodded. She looked out at the water. Then she said, "He asked about converting the boat shed too, and I wrote it down in my phone. 4 days later, my uncle posted something on Facebook. He didn't use my name. He talked about family members who weaponize generosity and use legal structures to control people they claim to love. His wife shared it and added a paragraph about how difficult it was to watch elderly family members be isolated from people who wanted to help them. 3 of my cousins commented with heart emojis. A family friend sent my grandmother a message asking if she was all right. I drafted one email. I sent it to my uncle, his wife, and to my firm's senior partner with a notation that I was keeping him informed. The email stated that any public statement referencing me, my grandmother, or the property in a manner that was materially false or that caused reputational or financial harm to any interest protected under the trust would be addressed as defamation under the Defamation Act of Prince Edward Island. That any further contact about the property was to go through my office, that I was documenting all communications from this point forward. The posts came down within 36 hours. 6 weeks after that, a man appeared at the cottage on a Tuesday afternoon while my grandmother was inside watching television. He knocked. She answered. He said he was from a property assessment firm and that he had an appointment. She said she hadn't made any appointment. He said her nephew had arranged it on her behalf. She told him to wait on the porch, went inside, and called me. I pulled up the security camera feed on my laptop. I had installed the system during the renovation, 4 exterior cameras, motion activated, feeding to a cloud account I managed. I could see the man clearly. He was carrying a clipboard and wearing a vest similar to the one the property manager had worn 6 weeks earlier. I texted my uncle a still image from the camera. I wrote, "I am watching this in real time. The trust documentation is on file with the province and with the RCMP detachment in Charlottetown. I suggest this person leave before the officer I have already called arrives." I also called the non-emergency line and described the situation. My uncle's reply came in 4 minutes. "Wrong address. Sorry, our mistake." The man was gone before the RCMP officer reached the lane. The officer took a statement anyway. I gave him a copy of the trust instrument and the cease and desist letter. He noted everything. That weekend, I drove out with a locksmith and replaced all the entry hardware with keypad deadbolts. I set codes that only my grandmother and I knew. I showed her how to use the camera feed on the tablet I'd left mounted in the kitchen. She watched the camera cycle through its views: porch, lane, side entrance, boat shed, with the focused attention she gives to things she intends to understand completely. Then she said, "Show me again how to take a screenshot." I showed her 3 times until she had it. She was quiet for a moment after. Then she said, "I want you to know I'm not confused about what happened. I know what your uncle was doing." She looked at me. "I just didn't know I was allowed to stop it." I told her she had always been allowed, we just hadn't made it official. My uncle sent an email 2 months later with the subject line, "Moving forward." 3 sentences. He said he had handled things poorly. He said he hoped we could eventually talk. He said he cared about this family. I read it once. I moved it to a folder I labeled documentation, and I have not replied. I have thought a lot about why I didn't see it coming. I think I believed that if the legal structure was solid, the human part would hold. I think I believed that what I had built was self-evidently not a commercial asset, and that anyone looking at it would see that too. What I understand now is that some people look at a place where someone else feels safe and see an opportunity, and the only thing that changes their calculation is when the cost of the opportunity exceeds the benefit. The legal structure didn't protect my grandmother because it was morally persuasive. It protected her because it made the alternative expensive. My grandmother called last Thursday to tell me the porch chairs had arrived. The ones she'd ordered from a shop in Cavendish, wide wooden things with flat arms for setting a mug on. She said she'd put them out herself and sat in both of them to decide which one she liked better. She said she was keeping both. She said the water had been very still that morning and the light had been remarkable. She said she wished I could have seen it. I told her I'd be out the following weekend. She said good. She said she was making the blueberry cake, the real one, not the mix, and that I should plan to stay at least 2 nights. She said she'd been rearranging the sitting room and wanted my opinion, though she said this in the way that made clear she had already decided and was extending the courtesy of being asked. I said I'd be there by noon on Saturday. There was a pause, and then she said, in the quiet way she says the things that matter most, "This is mine, isn't it? This is actually mine." I said yes. I said nobody could touch it. She said good, and then she said she had to go check something on the stove. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after she hung up in my office in Halifax on a Thursday afternoon, with the kind of stillness that doesn't happen often enough. You spend a long time believing that protecting someone quietly is the same as protecting them completely. What I know now is that quiet protection has limits. Sometimes you have to be loud about it. Sometimes you have to put the documents on the table one by one and let the room understand exactly where the boundary is. That's not the opposite of love. It's what love looks like when it has to hold its ground.